Hi everybody, I'm Riccardo. I'm here with Emanuele and Lorenzo from Rethinking Economics for College students. And today we will give a quick wrap up of the fiscal and monetary measures that have been taken up to now to manage the COVID-19 emergency around the world. And also to discuss which are the possible future alternatives in the light of the political debate we are now facing in Europe. So let's start with the US. Up to now, the US have allocated an impressive amount of money, more than 2.3 trillions, or 11% of the US GDP, to be provided in different forms to cover, at least ideally, every sector of the US economy. The money has been allocated with three acts. The main one is called the CARES Act, plus two previously minor ones, the Coronavirus Preparedness Response Act and the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. The program, which is the greatest in all the US history, at least in terms of money allocation, is so wide and complex that it's even difficult to interpret the official bill. So I suggest to look at the IMF website, which has a specific page which covers the different fiscal and monetary measures that have been taken by the states and also other nations in response to the COVID emergency. So we'll just go through the most important measures, allocations of the CARES Act and in general the US fiscal response. So the most important features of the program include the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a program aimed at supporting employers in paying employees' check, which amounts for approximately 350 billions. Moreover, we also have the Main Street lending programs accounting for 250 billions in loans and guarantees for businesses, up to 10 billions in revenues, and also the allocation of 500 billions in loans and guarantees for corporate failure, which is not an extremely high measure if compared to what has been done in Europe. But the three measures together reach up to almost half of the total of 2.3 trillion of allocated dollars. Interestingly, also the US government allocated specific measures for the airline industry, which wasn't doing so well also before the crisis, for 27 billion. So, as we said, approximately half of the total allocation of money has been used for business measures. On the other hand, if we look at the social and healthcare measures, approximately one third of the total amount of money has been allocated for this purpose, summing up the three acts. In particular, 130 billions have been allocated in relief to medical and hospital industries, plus a huge amount of money which has been allocated for research and trying to find a vaccine as first as possible. Probably the aim is to find it before other countries do it. As far, on the other end, as households measures are concerned, there are three main measures that have been applied. In particular, one-time tax rebates to individuals for 250 billions, and most importantly, an expansion of unemployment benefits, so a wider base, and also additional 600 euros per week on top of the unemployment amount determined by each state, and a two-week paid sick leave up to 3 months. So it's in total an up to 3-month emergency leave for those infected at two-thirds of the pay. Programs of food assistance and transfer to state has also been implemented, mainly to expand the unemployment insurance. Many criticisms have been raised to this program up to now, mostly on the operative functioning of the programs, as the procedure are still mostly undefined, and despite, from what Mr. Trump said, referring to the few glitches of the program. There have been harsh critics to the implementation of this program. The most important one are that the procedure are still not defined and small businesses cannot access the loan as banks have not been informed of how the money will be effectively delivered. And also the fact that the system to ask for the unemployment benefit is completely overwhelmed. For historical reason, the system is quite weak in comparison to the European one, and now people are calling continuously from 2 weeks and without receiving any kind of answer, as the phone line is always busy. The paid leave requirements also can be defined only by the businesses themselves. So this causes many problems, for example, in the area of New York, which is being strongly hit by the COVID-19 emergency, in particular because, for example, Amazon is asking for a positive test. But getting a positive test for accessing the 3 months emergency leave for the infected is not an easy task, as it's necessary to go through an extremely long procedure, as the healthcare system and test system in New York State is now overwhelmed. Basically, the system is that if you don't provide a positive test, you're just fired. Now, moving on to the monetary response of the United States, the Fed has cut from 1.75 base points to almost 0.25 base points the federal interest rate, starting in March 3rd with a quarter point cut, which has been the first emergency cut starting in 2008, and then in March 15, going on with another point and a quarter, cut. As we said, the rates have been stable until starting 2008, so it's a big move from the Fed. Another extremely important thing the Fed did is to announced open ending. So basically unlimited open market operations starting the 16th of March, after initially announcing operations for 700 billions. So basically what we will face is a continuous and extremely important wave of quantitative easing. As far as Italy is concerned, on the other hand, let's move to Europe. In Italy, the fiscal response consisted mainly in 2 decrees. The first one is the Cura Italia Act, which mobilized a total amount of 25 billions for a package that includes, among others, funds to strengthen the Italian healthcare system and the civil protection system for 3.2 billions, measures to preserve jobs and support income of laid-off workers and self-employed, which have been harshly criticized not only for the reduced amount that have been placed in this measure, but also for the procedure to access those benefits, actually, because as we all know, in Italy, the sites have crashed and not everybody has managed to get the money allocated for them. Finally, there are also measures to support the credit supply in this decree, which have been empowered by the following decree, the liquidity decree, starting the 6th of April. The liquidity decree aims to mobilize up to 400 billion euros in guarantees, which is up to 25% of the Italian GDP. Bringing the total, summing up with the previous one, at 750 billions, which are open to virtually all different businesses with different conditionalities. To conclude, the authorities indicated that further fiscal measures are being now considered, and most probably we will see more fiscal measures in the following weeks. Many criticalities have been asked also in Italy, mainly due, as we said, to the lack of coordination between central and local governments, and as far as the provision of medical supply is concerned. Um, Basically, the problem relies on the coordination, as we said, and also the coordination of the credit emission, because the liquidity decree provides guarantees at different levels, so for different percentages of the loans issued by private banks, and this forces for all businesses that are not specifically small and medium businesses to be forced to an inquiry of the private banks to define the solidity of the collateral. So it's a complex procedure that is being also more complicated by the current smart working situation. Um, so moving on to the monetary response of the ECB, we can see that the ECB started acting in the first half of March by announcing extra 120 billion euro to be added to its asset purchase program for 2020-21. And then after some perceived hesitation, it launched a program called the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, the PEPP, which goes up to 750 billion euros in purchases until the end of the year. So the total purchase announced in March amount to 7% of the EU GDP, and with the contribution of both programs, the bank's total planned purchases in 2020 reaches 1.1 trillion euros. So Christine Lagarde concluded saying that the ECB will do everything necessary within its mandate, which reminds a lot of the famous words of Mr. Mario Draghi. Apart from these major measures, the ECB also eased money lending to small and medium enterprises by adding additional longer-term targeted refinancing operation, the TLTROs, and reduce the interest rate to a record low of minus 0.75%. Finally, through the ECB banking supervision, the ECB lowered the capital requirements for its directly supervised bank, essentially in an attempt to free more liquidity, and allowed for a temporary relaxation of the collateral standards for the Eurosystem, refinancing operations such as MROs, LTROs, TLTROs, and the relaxation allowed also to make the Greek sovereign bonds eligible for the PEPP program. So I now leave the word to Emanuele that will tell us more about what are the fiscal measures that have been discussed recently in the Eurogroups, and then Lorenzo will provide us an overview of the political situation and the political debate.
Hi, everybody. I am Emanuele, and we will talk together about what the European governments decided about a common fiscal policy for Europe to cope with the COVID-19 crisis. So, maybe most of you know that on the 7th of April, we had a meeting with all the governors of around Europe, and they decided for four big fiscal policies and to commit on a roadmap for the recovery period. So, starting with the ESM, it has the European Stability Mechanism, that is basically a facility that helps countries gain back their marketability. When a country has a huge cost of debt, it cannot gain or sell bond on the market, and the ESM is the one responsible for getting back the country in the market at an affordable rate. So, stated that, the governors of Europe decided for a pandemic crisis support program, and in this program, the ESM will give the 240 billion left in firepower to the country, and this billion will be given through a loan-based program that is called the ACCL. It has a precautionary loan program that is not so strict in access criteria. Let's say that a country has to have a debt that is at least stable and not too bad. And this loan will be given under the covenants of using the proceeds only and only for covering healthcare costs. Each country can request a credit loan that can go up to the 2% of their GDP in 2019. And despite no condition has been already negotiated, we know that this condition will be standardized. It means that every country will have the same price, the same interest, and the same maturity for the credit facility given by the ESM. For the countries that don't have the euro as a currency, a similar instrument is the balance of payments, in which the European Council and the European Commission cooperate with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank to give countries a credit line that is very similar to the one of the ESM. Then the countries decided to cooperate with the European Investment Bank group, a group that is composed by the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund. The European Investment Fund is a fund that is very specific because it involved only venture capital operation focusing on small and medium cap. And this fund has a firepower left of around 40 billion. And the program that will be that has been announced for facing this crisis is a program that goes up to an hypothetical firepower of 200 billion. Why hypothetical? Because countries agreed on gathering a pan-European guarantee for this fund of 25 billion, and the leverage would be around 8 times the guarantee. So the more money the A bank can manage to gather, the more will be its firepower. Anyway, this program will focus on giving money to small and medium cap enterprises around Europe. And how the European Investment Bank would do that? They will do it cooperating with national commercial banks. Why that? Because the EIB only finance half of each program. So the other half will be financed by the national commercial banks that will cooperate with the EIB. Then we have a measure for unemployment, and this measure is called the SURE. This will be a fund that, as for the previous, will be loan-based. It means that every country will not have helicopter money, but they will have to repay these loans. And this fund will be up to 100 billion. Again, hypothetical 100 billion. Why so? Because this time the governors decided to set a guarantee that is at least 25% of the firepower. And this guarantee will be made of voluntary contribution of members. And this means that, as for before, the more money we can gather through voluntary contribution as a guarantee, the bigger is the firepower of this fund. This credit facility will have conditions that will be evaluated by the European Commission itself in cooperation with the governor that decide to ask for this credit line. And this the proceeds coming from this fund can be used only for financing policies that concern working hour reduction. What does that mean? It means that the government will give people money as let's say as support income, an integration income that is aiming to cover that not worked hours. And as last instrument of the big money, we have the recovery fund. Maybe most of you know that 9 countries wrote a letter to the European Commission asking for a common fund, a common, let's say, a common debt. And the recovery fund is a proposal that these 9 countries made to the Eurogroup, and this fund there ain't much that has been set already, because we know that on April 23rd, countries will meet another time to negotiate the condition of this fund. But so far, we know that this fund will be used to finance projects that will guarantee the kickstart of the economy, and that this project will be in line and compliant with what are now the priorities of Europe. We have rumors, and we can say that, for example, Bruno Le Maire claim for a firepower of up to 500 billion, and that on the document that went out from the meeting, it says that there will be used innovative financial instruments, that, of course, bring the thoughts to the Eurobonds. Anyway, as I said before, we have also other policies that are going to drive a map through the recovery, and so every country committed itself in working on a budget that should be as flexible as possible. So the European Commission will, of course, take into account the crisis effect on the economy when planning the new European budget. And this budget will be very, very capient, we could say, because everybody knows that Europe will need a lot of money. Anyway, this budget won't be only huge, but will be also very flexible, because the Eurogroup decided to be able in the future to shift money from an allotment to another. That means that if, for example, 200 billion are set to be used for a green operation, but suddenly the COVID patient surge, then the money can be shifted to the healthcare budget. Stated that the Eurogroup decided also to use the funds that Europe has left for healthcare, and this is 3 billion euros. So we have 2.7 billion from the emergency support instrument, and another 300 million from the rescue medical equipment capacity. And this money will be used by the European Commission itself to act in scale. It means that the European Commission will purchase medical supplies for members and then distribute them, and will finance the test and the cure researches, and will also guarantee to patients transfer cross border. I just want to say that, for example, today the Ms. von der Leyen said that the money from the rescue medical equipment capacity are already being used so far to purchase ventilator, and they will be soon available to members. Now, I'd like to ask to Ricardo, what do you think about comparing the European policies with the US one?
Thank you, Emanuele. Before to leave the word to Renzo, I would like just to make a quick reflection on the comparison of the US response in relation to the EU one. So comparing the data that we have right now is not sufficient clearly to say which country is answering better the crisis, as the response is continuously evolving. So what we can do is comparing the starting point, the base points for both the EU and the US. So on one end, we have the US with social security expenditure that has been around 12-13% of the federal budget in 2008, considering the widest possible consideration of the term. On the other hand, the EU stood at an average of 27.9 public expenditure in 2017. So the difference is clear with the EU that more than doubles the US expenditure. As far as healthcare expenditure is concerned, we see that in the US, Medicare plus Medicaid, which represent the main public healthcare system providing by the government, so in a public way, account for up to 5% of federal budget, with an 8.5% of people estimated not to have any kind of health insurance in the US, and many more with an health insurance which is not enough to cover for the requirement treatment to face COVID-19 emergency. While in the EU, we have an average of 10% of public expenditure with high differences among states. So before leaving the word to Lorenzo, I would like to leave you with a question. So will the spending an enormous amount of money once just like it's happening in the US right now, be enough to cope with the emergency, or the US will show clearly that its model, from a structural point of view, is not adequate? So, in other words, is the system that leaves in the end of the market also the responsibility for healthcare and healthcare fit to face such an emergency? Thank you, Lorenzo. I leave the word to you.
Thank you, Riccardo and Emanuele. So now we are in the third part of this podcast, and what we will do in this third part of this podcast is trying to understand if the European economic system is more or less resilient to an external shock that could hit the economy. So how we will do this? We will look at some indicators. They should illustrate how the economic system is changed along these years. So the first indicator that we are going to look is youth unemployment rate. The youth unemployment rate is the number of unemployed 15-24-year-olds expressed as a percentage of the youth labor force. Unemployed people are those who report that they are without work, that they are available for work, and that they have taken active steps to find work in the last 4 weeks. Youth unemployment is a strong indicator in forecasting the eventuality of social unrest. One of the contributions is given by Joseph Stiglitz on this topic, who said in a panel conference with Thomas Piketty and Paul Krugman, if young men cannot free their energy in something positive and productive as work, they will find other ways to do so. So, this first comparison allows us to understand the dynamics of this two-speed Europe. So basically what we can look is that the unemployment rate on average for the northern countries does not overthrow the value 20. So it means that youth unemployment rate on average between northern countries is less than 20. However, what happens if we look at Southern Europe instead of Northern Europe? Well, we can see that from 2008 there is actually a steep increase in youth unemployment rate. There's this maximum around 2013 in countries like Spain and Greece. It arrived even above 50%, meaning that 1 every 2 youngs was without a job, but even without studying, for example. We can note, even if unemployment decreased over the last 3-4 years, we can actually see a difference between the average unemployment rate for Southern Europe and the average unemployment rate for Northern Europe. As a second indicator, I wanted to analyze hours worked. The data cover employees and self-employed workers. This indicator is measured in terms of hours per worker per year. This figure shows two things clearly. First, workers in northern countries on average work less hours than those in Southern Europe countries. But more importantly is that while there is a general decrease in the hours worked along the period examined, such decrease is stronger on average in the northern countries than in the southern ones. This denotes something totally wrong with European economic management, allowing economies with higher unemployment rates, lower wages, as you can see going on the OECD website, working much more without enjoying the benefits of such stressful efforts. This we could make an hypothesis that have a key role in increasing the likelihood of social unrest caused by the weakest categories. The next measure that we will look at is called the Palma ratio. The numerator is the share of all income received by the 10% people with the highest disposable income. The denominator is the share of all income received by the 40% people with the lowest disposable income. This measure has been introduced by Palma in 2011, who found that almost always nearly half of GNI is held from middle class. Consider the population accounted from the median value to the 19th percentile, and the other half is split between the richest 10% and the poorest 40%. This comparison shows that for almost all the high-speed European countries, the value of the ratio is lower than 1, meaning that in those countries, the 10% richest income accounts for less than the 40% poorest one, and remains lower than 1 on average for most of the countries in the whole time range. The same cannot be inferred for the PIGS countries. Them, already in 2009, had a ratio on average higher than 1.2. And the situation seems not to register strong improvement in the next 8 years, ending on average in 2017 around the same value. So what can be said? In the PIGS countries, the richest 10% income accounts more than the income earned by the 40% poorest, and a lot, given that it is on average around 20% more. The next figure that we will analyze is a general government revenue, represented as thousands of US dollars per capita. What should be said on this purpose is that governments collect revenues mainly for two purposes: to finance the goods and services they provide, and to fulfill their distributive role within society. The first thing that should be noted is that already in 2007 there was a clear difference between the northern states and the southern ones. This comparison put in evidence the problems of fiscal capacity encountered by the Mediterranean states. In fact, southern countries on average increase their government revenues nearly of 1.5 thousands, while northern countries have been able to increase their revenues well over 5 thousands. This low increase in revenues could be correlated with a higher rate of tax avoiding and evasion, a perspective that do not seem real if we take in account the case of Italy. So, what can be said is that not only there is a discrepancy between Southern Europe and Northern Europe along several indicators, not only this one that I'm telling you about it, but more importantly, there is a path that leads to divergence and not convergence, meaning that basically for us things are going to be worse and worse, and for the others are going to be better but with a decreasing rate, because we are interconnected and they feel our slowdown as well. Now let's move on and start talking about politics and how policies and decision making affects even those that are not Europeans and try to arrive in Europe, escaping from wars and very bad socioeconomic conditions. More or less 2 weeks ago, Ursula von der Leyen, EU Commission head, said that Luxembourg would probably accept some of the 1,600 unaccompanied minors currently languishing in the Greek Moria camp. What I would like to reflect on is why Luxembourg choose to accept some and not all, for example. So I would like to give you some data about Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a country that has a GDP per capita around 105 thousands, one of the highest around the world, and a population of 609,000. Adopting 1,600 children who lost probably their parents and that have acquired a significant amount of human capital in their short life because they witnessed violence, war, probably very bad things, but those bad things are able to build a great empathy and probably love in those people. So Luxembourg do not allow them a future, do not allow them an education, because it's not a convenient investment. With a GDP of over 69 billions, it is not profitable to spend a few millions to save children of wars and give them a future. left to die alone on the day of Easter by a Europe that speaks emptily of solidarity towards people who suffer. This is a tweet by the Italian unit of Sea-Watch, the German NGO, on Sunday. In fact, even after the information provided by NGO that 4 boats carrying 258 migrants were in distress, about 47 people were rescued on Monday morning by a Spanish NGO. And even if European Union states have known about this for 58 hours, they failed to intervene. Italian government declared its own ports unsafe, and the Maltese government banned rescue ships from bringing migrants to Malta. Now let's spend these last minutes speaking about the reasons behind the behavior of Europe states. Starting with Northern Europe, we can see that Northern Europe is totally in favor of the mess. This is because there is this frame issue of Southern Europe countries as countries who do not spend money wisely and lost a lot of it actually. This narrative is championed by Wopke Extra, who is the finance minister of the Netherlands, who is ensuring his political career at the expense of the whole Europe, probably. For the Southern Europe countries instead, we are striving for Eurobond, and Italy and France are being championed with different ideas. Now the one of France, the fund proposed by France, seemed to be the best option, while the European Commission is focused over the multi-annual budget as a way to solve the problem, and the ECB is still fixed with inflation and price stability. And even if those are trying to convince all the other states to spend money in order to save Europe, for states as the northern ones, spending money seems to be very difficult given their electoral constraints in a certain sense. What does that mean? It means that the political stakes for the political player have never been so high as in this moment. Consequently, everyone wants the full support of his or her constituency before making a decision. This is translated as a total opposition and not a collaboration between a Mediterranean Europe that remember the mess still with a lot of resentment even for the conditions imposed over Greece, but on the other hand, even from Northern Europe countries that see the Eurobonds as the devil, because it would allow Southern Europe countries to share future debts with them, and they think that Southern Europe countries are not able to manage their debt, that are not able to conduct effective and efficient policies. Why we need Eurobond? We need Eurobond because given that the ECB is focused over inflation and price stability, if they could now buy our debt, the problem is that, for instance, if things change in the market, Then the ECB, to maintain inflation close to 2%, would be required to sell government securities over the market. So our debt, as well as France debt or Spanish debt or Greece debt, could end up in private sector hands, and the private sector, as we already know, are always ready to speculate over public debt. Well, really thank you for your attention. Let us know what do you think, if you have observation, question, critics, everything is well accepted. Thanks.